Okay, we are starting chapter 47. So there's two quotes that we're going to come across in this chapter that I think it's wise for us to just familiarize ourselves with them. You'll see them in the chapter and you recognize them. But here's their source material, and here they are. One is a quote from the Talmud. It's the volume of Psachim, which speaks about all the laws of Pesach, including the Haggadah. And it has this quote: in every generation, now you see there it says in every generation, we'll see how the Alter Rebbe tweaks that, and we'll talk about it. A person must, now this is how they're translating it, regard himself. The literal translation is to see oneself, to view oneself, or, as we will also explain, to demonstrate. That is not only how they view themselves, it's also can include how they project themselves, as though he personally had gone out of Egypt, or, as we'll also potentially read it, is going out of Egypt, because that's one of the core themes of this chapter, is the personal application of the idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And it's based on the pasuk that says, and you shall tell your son, this is the source material for the mitzvah of the Haggadah, the obligation to tell it to somebody else, in that day, saying, it is because of what Hashem did for me when I, you see how it personally emphasized it is, came forth out of Egypt. That is the source material for the Haggadah, and as we'll see, the Alter Rebbe is going to expound upon that. This simply says in every generation, a person has to do it. And we're going to talk about, as we see here in the end of the third paragraph of the Shema, you recognize, I am Hashem, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, am your God. Emes, true. Ani Hashem lekechem, emes. Of course, in the actual Chumash, it doesn't have that word emes at the end that we have inserted or attached to the end of the Shema. So that's not in the Chumash. And we'll talk about what that adds to this message and why it's part of the Shema. What does it have to do with the Shema, as we will talk about? Okay, so we're going to see these in the actual chapter. I thought it was a good idea for us to look at them first and sort of have them clear and what their source material is and so forth. So here we go. This chapter is going to be speaking about another strategy as to how we can hope to inspire within ourselves a love of Hashem. So far, we've talked about having Rahmanis on our poor neshama that gets stuck in a body that takes it to places it doesn't want to go. We talked about the reflective form of love, that when I recognize that Hashem is the provider of the most essential significance of my being, that is, that I exist, and all the, quote, work that Hashem does to go through the processes called the tzimtzum, so that he creates this physical world that can mock him or ignore him, and yet it's worthwhile. So similarly, if Hashem will, quote, put away or put to the side the opportunity to go where he is most comfortable, that is with the angels, who appreciate his identity and his infinity, or at least appreciate it more than we seem to, and still align himself with us, similarly, I could put away what I am more naturally comfortable with, which is my own material well-being, so that I can be aligned with the infinity of Hashem. We talked about the analogy of the king taking the person from the lowest social economic stratosphere, literally lying in the pile of trash, and elevating them, showing them personal kindness, consideration, and empowering them to be in alignment with the king and in the service of the king and indispensable to the king. In this chapter, we're going to sort of double down on the question that the person might be asking, but it's hard for me to really appreciate this infinity of Hashem because it's not something that I am visually given access to, meaning I don't see it. It feels like life is a series of, wins and losses, good days and better days, and so forth. So how can I have this personal, enthusiastic, passionate desire to be close with Hashem when I'm not feeling it in that, or I'm not experiencing it, and therefore I'm not, I don't seem to have access to it. So what we are going to be talking about in this chapter is how we have an opportunity to reflect on every day's opportunity for us to be freed from the Meitzarim Ugvulim. You recognize that the Hebrew word Mitzrayim, which simply means the land area, the country called Egypt, it also has its own definition. It means a place where we are being squeezed. And if anybody is feeling squeezed, and one of the great roadblocks to feeling a love for Hashem is a sense that my life is not what I need it to be. And as an illustration of this, we've mentioned before, the Alter Rebbe doesn't talk about it in this chapter, but I think it adds to the image of it. It's actually originally a quote from Peric. We may also know it because it's the end of the Shemona Esrei, when we say, may it be his will that the Beis HaMikdash be built speedily in our days and grant us our portion in your Torah. So we ask the question, this seems to be two separate ideas, the Beis HaMikdash being built. How does that grant us our portion in your Torah? So we explain that every person has their unique contribution to bring to the world in every manner, including in the understanding of Torah. And that's why we quote the author of a concept, because there's something about their life experience that adds to and shapes and nuances the character of their teaching. So why is it that I don't always discover that? Why is it that I may go through my education and only feel like all I'm doing is absorbing other people's perspectives? Well, part of the reason is because we're so swamped with life and trying to make it to tomorrow and pay the bills and do all of the activities that demand our time. We don't have the clarity, we don't have the luxury to have the clarity of thought to come up with an innovative idea. It's not granted to us. We just don't have the time or the mind space or the clarity, because we're so inundated with all the things that we have to do that we may not get that chance. Or we might make the argument that a secular society sort of beats that out of us. Nobody's interested in what I have to say. We're just interested in what other people have to say, experts, we get bombarded, whatever the different reasons. So part of the tefillah, why do we want the Beis HaMikdash? So that we will not have, just like, thank God we now have machines that can do things that human beings used to do. And therefore human beings can do things that are more exclusively human. We're not carrying packs on our back, and we're not drawing water and chopping the ice with our bare hands. So too, when Mashiach will come, we'll have rest, but not rest that will lead us to sitting on the couch, but rest that will allow us to explore our spiritual side. In other words, we're in Mitzrayim. And just like Bashgacha Pratis, these are the parshas we're reading now. So, of course, there it's a physical, literal, vicious slavery. Conceptually, though, the idea is really the same. We're living in a Mitzrayim, whatever that Mitzrayim is, whether it's our just the mundanities of life, and therefore we don't have seemingly the opportunity to feel this unbridled love of Hashem. We don't have this luxury to feel this sense of closeness and so on. So what we're going to be emphasizing in this chapter is that we can have a Yetzias Mitzrayim, an exodus from Egypt, in our daily lives. That is given, we are given a lifeline to have that experience of exiting Egypt from our own skills or through our own access points. And when we do that, we can have a greater luxury of the love of Hashem, and B, we can feel the appreciation that Hashem gives us a way out of the rat race, as we might call it. I've told this before, but Remember, in England, they call it a holiday, whereas in America, we call it vacation. And they used to say, see, you just want to vacate, which is that sort of typical American vacation. You go to Hawaii, you sit on the beach, you eat too much, you sleep late, you do nothing. But holidays are supposed to uplift, right? That is, we ordinarily are doing mundane days, ordinary days. And then we have holidays when we become uplifted. And this is an opportunity that we have every day. And this is one of the points Alter Rebbe is going to mention. And again, therefore, two things. A, we feel an appreciation to Hashem because he's given us a way out. B, though that way out gives us the luxury of being able to focus on and be engaged in the loving of Hashem without the crushing, what's the word I'm looking for? Compression of gullus. Okay, so here we go. Peric memzine. Vihine, again, if you see, this chapter begins with a vav, which suggests we're in the same series, and this series continues through chapter 49, where we're looking for different strategies as to how we can have a personal experience of a love of Hashem, how we can make that radiate within our existence. Now, look here. You remember, we just looked at the actual original text in the Gemara, and you'll notice how the Alter Rebbe nuances that text. So the Alter Rebbe writes, V'hinei b'chol dor dor. And then he adds, B'chol yom v'yom. Every generation and generation. That's literally what it reads as. And the Alter Rebbe tweaks it by adding, it's not only a generational idea, it's not only on Pesach that we reflect on the once upon a time there was something that happened. This is the question. Why is it when we sit down at the Seder that we're talking about the Jews who went out of Mitzrayim? We have our own challenges. So I'm very happy that they went out of Mitzrayim. But what does it have to do with me? I'm in my own Mitzrayim. And as we know, throughout Jewish history, there have been some pretty harsh Mitzrayims, not just the spiritual, emotional, but the real physical and torment. And yet they held a Seder. And we might ask this question: why are they holding a Seder in this place? Seemingly, they're in a worse spot. And that's the message. That the Seder is not just a story about once upon a time, 3,500 years ago, that our ancestors went out of Mitzrayim. It's the story about each of us. So we might think, okay, this is, as the Mishnah says explicitly, in every generation, we should remember it. And that's what the Alter Rebbe underscores by tweaking it and saying that this isn't only something that happens in a generation or it happens at Pesach. It's an opportunity for us every day. Just to add one little nuance, we know that the Haggadah that we read on Pesach is not one of our holy books. It's not like Megillas Esther. It's a book that was compiled. It's more like the Seder. It was compiled in the times of the Mishnah, and it was designed to effectuate all of the obligations that were necessary to be checked off on a list on the night of Pesach. So you go through the Haggadah, you cover everything. So if we were the committee that was entrusted with writing the Haggadah, we might think, why don't we sit down and open up the Chumash and tell the story? I mean, the story is really barely mentioned. It's mostly stories about the contemporary authors. But let's tell the story about how we wound up in Egypt through Yosef and the dreams and the famine and so on. And we explain, why isn't that in the Haggadah? And the answer is because the presumption is that you know that already, that the person who's coming to the Seder is already familiar with it. Why? Because we mention it every day. And as we'll see, the Alter Rebbe is going to underscore this, and you recognize that we mention it all the time. Friday night Kiddush, we say, Zeicher li'yetzias Mitzrayim. We remember that we went out of Mitzrayim. It's Friday night. What does that have to do with Mitzrayim? We say it in the Shema, the third paragraph of the Shema, and just to double down, because in the Haggadah, you recognize that it asks the question, how do we know that we say the exodus from Egypt at night? That's the story of Elazar ben Azariah. You said, behold, I'm like a man of 70 years old, and I did not merit that we should say mention the leaving of Egypt at night. When do we mention it at night? Every night when we say the Shema, the third paragraph of the Shema, which speaks about the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the mitzvah of tzitzis is not applicable at night, because the mitzvah says, and you should see them, from whence we deduce that we're only obligated to wear tzitzis when they are visible by the sunlight. So why is that paragraph mentioned in the evening Shema? And the explanation is because it also mentions about the exodus from Egypt. And we mentioned that even at night, and we have all the other explanations. So what we see is that the exodus from Egypt is not just generational. It's not just Pesach. It is every day. So the Alter Rebbe here is not designed to do an analysis of the legalities of the terms in the Mishnah. So he doesn't quote the Mishnah the way we have it, that simply says in every generation. His objective here is to illustrate the concept that it's every day that we are not only talking about it, that is recalling it, expressing our gratitude. As we will say, it is about each of us experiencing an exodus from our own Mitzrayim, literally every day. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is going to emphasize. And that's why he says, also makes another tweak, the last phrase, where he says, Hu yetze hayoy mi Mitzrayim, that he is leaving today from Mitzrayim. Not just that he can leave Mitzrayim, not just that it's but literally every day. And that's not the way it's mentioned in the Mishnah. So now if we go back to that Mishnah, just to look at it for a moment, in every generation, a person must regard himself as though he personally had gone out of Egypt. And the Alter Rebbe adds, it's not only in every generation, it's every day. And it's not only that he's going out of Egypt, that he goes out of Egypt every day. And those, I'll just refer to as mini exoduses from Egypt, is the emphasis of this chapter, that those are our opportunities to feel a love for Hashem, because our presumption is that everybody has an intuitive love for Hashem, but it gets squashed by life, and that Hashem offers us a chance out, a way out, just like it was when we left Mitzrayim. Hashem opened up the gates, but we did have to leave. We had to put in our effort, and that's the exploration of the rest of this chapter. Now, here we go. What does it mean that every day I go out of Mitzrayim? Clearly, it doesn't mean that I make a geographic transition from Egypt, because obviously we're not in Egypt. What then does it mean? So the Alter Rebbe explains, Vihi, and that is Yitzias Nefesh Elokis b'Maser Aguf. That is the opportunity of the Nefesh Elokis to leave the confines of the body. And again, a basic point of Tanya, that every Nefesh Elokis, like every child loves their parent, every Nefesh Elokis loves Hashem, not because they enjoy everything about what Hashem does, simply because that is the intuitive impulse of their identity. Like a child naturally wants to be connected to their parent, like even in the animal kingdom and in the plant kingdom, everything reverts back to its origin. In a similar fashion, the neshama longs to be close to Hashem. But then we say, but what happens? It gets crushed. It gets crushed by the body, because the body wants to do all kinds of body things. And it's compelled to do all kinds of body things, because how am I supposed to live if I don't go to work, and so on and so forth? So do we ever get a respite? It's somewhat similar to what we talk about on Yom Kippur. We know that our whole mission in life is to make the world a godly place. This is what we're told. Every day we got to make the world a godly place. But we're only human. We're limited entities, and it's hard. It's hard to always be worried about making the world a godly place. Don't I ever get to be completely self-indulgent? Don't I ever get to just take care of myself? So Hashem says, you know what, you're right. I'm going to give you a day where you don't have to think about the rest of the world. You don't even have to think about your own body. That's Yom Kippur. You don't have to eat. You don't have to shower. You don't have to drink. You can just totally and completely indulge yourself. You get to be totally spiritual on this day. You don't even have to be social. You don't have to have any friends over. No one would be upset if you just put your nose in this machzer and daven the whole day. Everyone would understand it's Yom Kippur. That's a reasonable thing for people to do, to spend all of their time in daven. So too, here, the Alter Rebbe is saying that Hashem is giving us these little opportunities every day, that the Nefesh Elokis should be released from the prison of the physical body. Why is it compared to a prison? So as the Alter Rebbe has explained earlier, that just like Chas v'Shalom, if a person's in prison, he's still a person, he still has his mobility, he's still functional, but he can't express himself as he chooses to. I mean, Chas v'Shalom, this is what it means to be in prison, that you can't do what you want to do. You have to do what somebody else tells you. What is slavery? Slavery means that I am not of my own authority. Just to illustrate the point, clearly we're using this as a metaphor for the harsh slavery that our ancestors suffered under. And yet the conceptual idea of slavery is relevant here as well. We have a halacha that in Torah that you're not allowed to enslave another person. You know, it's one of the 10 commandments. You're not allowed to kidnap somebody and enslave them. This is extended not only to the most brutal form that we could imagine, also to far subtler forms. An example, we have and again, I'm not here for a legal analysis or even halachic analysis, but just to illustrate a point. We have a concept in American business. It's called a do not compete law. It's a very basic thing. I don't know if I understand all the nuances. And again, I don't mean to be distracted. But if I have a business and I am, I own a company that makes tires, and somebody wants to buy it, but he's afraid that he's going to buy my business. And then tomorrow I'll open up another business. I'll have all the customers. I'll have all the contacts. Everyone knows me, and they'll keep buying from me. So he makes me sign an agreement that I will not compete with him. It's do not compete. Again, I don't know if I'm perfectly capturing the legal concept, but you understand the idea. In Torah, we would not permit that. Why? Because that's enslaving me. What do you mean I can't sell tires? I'm not beholden to another person. So we come up with some other creative way to do it. But just to explain the idea that slavery in Torah is defined not only in the vicious, harsh ways of our ancestors building the cities of Pithom and Ramses. Slavery is defined as any restraint on my capacity to express myself and pursue my own agenda. So you're telling me I can't do this business? That's making me a slave. Again, it's restraint of my expression of my labor, but the pursuit of my parnasa. So anything that restrains is like being in prison. So the neshama is restrained because the body is always wanting to eat and sleep, etc. And not only does the body want to do body stuff, but the body is mishka dechuya. It's like a snake's skin. Now, again, when we hear that word snake, we think about the snake in Gan Eden. It's the lowliest creature. It's that it's not only that it's animalistic, that is, it only wants to do what it wants to do, like any animal. It's the lowliest, that is, it's the most self-indulgent of animals that don't even contribute anything to society. But it's only a skin. And it's not that the person is a snake. It's simply the snake's skin. And skin can be shed. And again, I'm not here to overdo the analogy, but a snake sheds its skin. And as we talk about klipa, which is the shell that tries to squash our godliness, but the godliness can peek through, klipas noga, the light can seep through that less thick shell. We talk about the orange peel and the walnut shell as an analogy. So the human being is compressing and confining, better, their godly soul. But it's only like the skin. And what does that godly soul long to do? It longs to be unified with the infinity of Hashem. It doesn't want to be engaged in material things. And we're not talking about bad things. We're not talking about averas necessarily, although, of course, that temptation is there as well. but it doesn't want to eat and sleep and go to work and do physical things. It simply wants to be completely subsumed within the infinity of Hashem. And what is the mechanism to be completely subsumed within the infinity of Hashem? Through engaging in Torah and mitzvahs. That's where it is comfortable. That's where it wants to be. The godly soul wants to be there. So how's it supposed to do that? It's in Mitzrayim. Again, Mitzrayim, prison, slavery is not only in the most dramatic of formats, it is anything that restrains the person, or in this case, the neshama, from being where it wants to be. I want to go there. You can't go there. You can't go there. You know, I mean, we feel this on occasion. You know, we get like a snowstorm. You can't go there. But I want to go there, but you can't. You can't get there. The snow is too deep. And it's a very frightening circumstance. But that's where I want to be, but you can't get there. You know, you can't cross that bridge. And the mechanism for the neshama to be released is through Torah and mitzvah. So Hashem is extending this rescue opportunity, this exit path, through Torah and mitzvahs. So again, two things. One, there is a chance for my neshama to feel the closest with Hashem. Again, remember, the petitioner is coming to the Alter Rebbe and asking for guidance, assistance, direction for feeling close and loving and warm with Hashem. So he's telling him, A, there is a way out of the Mitzrayim, although it may only be temporary because eventually you got to go back. And that is to do Torah and mitzvahs. So two things. A, you can have that experience. And B, you have a gratitude to the infinity of Hashem that he's given you a way out. You know, he's given you an opportunity to leave that prison. So, I mean, again, there is the challenge that a person might say, oh, it's terrible. So here's the way out. No, that won't work. Nothing works. You know, again, the Nefesh HaBahamis gets very, very scared about this because he sees where this is leading. He sees that when the person engages in Torah and mitzvahs, it's to the, I'll call it to the detriment of the animal soul, because every moment spent engaged in Torah and mitzvahs is a moment less engaged in self-servingness. And that's why it becomes, as the Gemara says, the time of davening is a time of battle. Why is it so difficult? Why is it that as soon as I start davening, my mind wanders and all kinds of distractions and so on? Because the animal soul is getting very irritated. Here comes the escape from Mitzrayim. Again, using that story of Yetzias Mitzrayim that we're learning now, Mamash, in the Parshas, is exactly what we're experiencing. So here the Alter Rebbe continues and he says, Ubefrat, specifically, what is the particular exodus from Egypt? The Kabbalah's Malchus Shemayim. Specifically, when we declare that Hashem is our authority. When do we declare this? B'Kriyas Shema. When we say the Kriyas Shema, Shabbat, Makabel, Mamshech Alav, Yehuda, Yizbarach, Befedish, Ba'amru Hashem, Lekenu Hashem Echad. When we make this absolute declaration that Hashem is our God, which we'll talk about what that means. It seems on the surface almost chutzpah. Hashem is our God. I mean, my watch is my watch. Hashem is mine. It seems like an odd thing to say. It almost seems like a disrespectful thing to say. And what does that exactly mean? And why is it that when we make this declaration, this is sort of the ultimate exodus from Egypt? So let's back up here for a few moments and talk about this. What do we mean when we say, O Malchus Shemayim? So again, going back to the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, you recall that the first real profound demonstrative step of the Exodus comes while we're still in Mitzrayim, and Hashem gives the first mitzvah, the first collective Jewish mitzvah to the people, which is the establishment of their own calendar. that Nisan should be Achedesh Hazel Lechem Rish Chadashim. This month should be the first of months. So the explanation as to why this is so profound, why is this such a big deal? Because when you declare, when you think about this weekend as a good illustration, you declare that our calendar is not the calendar of others. We are on our own calendar. When you make that declaration, you have released yourself from the values, from the culture of those around you. And again, you think about what we're literally living through this weekend versus the world. Just to share, they sent me an email from the security company. They wanted to know if we're open on December 25th. I said, yes, we are. And they sent a Jewish guy yesterday, which was another interesting. I forgot to tell him we don't hire Jews, but we gave him an aliyah and he had some cholent. Okay, I forgot to tell him we don't hire Jews, but what should we do? But again, we've all experienced this. I imagine people are stunned. You're not celebrating. You don't put up, really? Like, aren't you merry? Right. So the ultimate declaration, or the original declaration of our freedom is to say we have our own calendar. So when we declare Shema, that we accept upon ourselves that our Malchus is Malchus Shemayim. Like Peric says, whoever accepts upon themselves the yoke of heaven releases themselves from the yoke of government and the yoke of the common way, the derech eretz, the way everybody else does. And if a person shirks the yoke of heaven, they wind up yoked by something else, whether it's government or popular culture or politics or whatever it is. They wind up being yoked by something else. So again, back into the analog. A person is feeling completely overwhelmed by their life. And, the Alter Rebbe is not talking to commodities traders. He's talking to people who tend to be working sun up to sundown and scratching out their parnasa. And they're feeling completely overwhelmed. And they don't have any opportunity for a love of Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe's first message to them is we have to declare that our value system is Malchus Shemayim, the authority of heaven. It's not the authority of common culture. It's not the authority of the political realities and conventional wisdom and trends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first thing we have to declare. That we bring upon ourselves this, and we say, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That is, this is the specific idea, and it's a curious halacha. Let me maybe back up here and use this as an entryway. The halacha asks a question: do we require kavanagh, intent, when we do mitzvahs and when we daven? Is it enough to read the words, or do we have to have intent? However, we're going to measure intent. So when it comes to the Shema, the answer is that a person must have intent at least through the first line. And again, historically, until to this day, people have to be places at work at certain hours, and they're maybe saying the Shema while they're driving and they're going. The Torah has a lot of understanding for the limits on people's time and their opportunity to daven and bench and so on. There's many, many leniencies about doing abbreviated benching, abbreviated davenings, and so on. So what is the intent that a person has to have kavanagh? And the halachic answer is that a person has to have kavanagh through Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Meaning, just like the Alter Rebbe mentioned back in chapter 41, that you have to harness the ox before it can plow your field. Similarly, before we can have liberty to be liberated from the oppressions of our humanity, we first have to redirect ourselves. Again, like we talked about the Rebbe's Moment of Silence campaign, that we have to start off the day by thinking, and each one of us has to do that occasional reset about going forward by focusing on what is our identity, who are we, and where are we, and so forth. So when we say the Shema, and we talk about this as well, although we're not going so much about it, that is, we cover our eyes, because our eyes are what sees things that get distracted. It's one of the reasons why a person shouldn't daven near a mirror, because they notice something about themselves. They have some dust on their jacket or whatever it is. And we're trying not to be distracted. So we cover our eyes, or as the Rebbe always emphasizes, that we daven by looking in the Seder. In other communities, they're very big into davening by heart. The Rebbe makes a recommendation that a way to fixate one's concentration is to look in the Seder, and it's simply beyond the spiritual benefits and the pronunciation benefits and so on. It's simply a good tool to keep one fixated, because if I'm just saying it by heart, sometimes my mind wanders and I'm saying the words, but I'm thinking somewhere else. My head is in one place and my mouth is in another place. So we cover our eyes, we cover out everything else, all the things that are bombarding us continuously. And we make this declaration that Hashem is our God. Now, it's an odd point, and we won't get into it in so much detail, but just for a moment, the Shema is Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, as we all recognize. Now, this seems unusual. We say he's Hashem, that is, he is innately God, sort of the abstract conceptual. And then we say he's Elokeinu, he's our God. Now we've made him very personal. And then we go back to that abstract declaration that he is Hashem. So Chassidus explains that this is the ultimate objective of Shema. Like we always say, Hashem is not looking for fans. So we're not simply declaring that Hashem is Hashem. We're saying he's ours. Now, how is he ours? So there's two ways that something can be ours. So my watch is mine. It means it's mine. If I don't like it anymore, I throw it out. Or we mean, like we say, these are my children. These are my friends. They're not mine in my service. They are mine, that we are absolutely unified, regardless of whether we live up to each other's expectations or not. Hashem is absolutely my Hashem, regardless of it. So in a sense, he is ours because we are his. Like we talk about, and you recognize from the Shemona Esrei, he's God of Abraham, God of Isaac. He's Elokeinu, and therefore it's valuable that he's, meaning in the Shemona Esrei, I'm jumping around here a little bit, we say Hashem Elokeinu, he's our God, and then we say he's Elokei Abraham, Elokei Yitzchak. So we ask, that's backwards. Why don't we go chronologically? First he was God of Abraham, then he was God of Isaac, then he was God of Jacob, then he was my God. And we explain, because the fact that he's the God of Abraham is like saying, am I honest? My great-grandfather was very honest. But if you go into the store and you want to purchase something from somebody, you want to know if he's a skilled engineer, not if his great-great-grandfather was a skilled engineer. Now, if he's a skilled engineer and he comes from a long line of skilled engineers, that adds substance to his skill. So if Hashem is Elokeinu, then the fact that he was Elokei Abraham, Yitzchak is meaningful. But if he's not at mine, then saying, am I honest? My Alter Zedi was honest is not so meaningful. It's not that significant. So this is what we are emphasizing, that when we do a mitzvah, we become united with Hashem and Hashem united with us, like the guy pulled out of the trash heap and attached to the king that we describe, meaning he becomes significant because of his relationship with Hashem, because Hashem becomes his Hashem and he becomes Hashem's. Like we say, he becomes our God, like he's the God of Abraham. If he's not the God, if he's not our God, the fact that he's the God of Abraham is pretty insignificant. We would say it's not meaningful. I'm sorry, hold on. I'm sorry. Okay. It's not meaningful if he's only God of Abraham, unless he's also my God. What made him the God of Abraham? And why do we put them on the same plane that he's Elokeinu? Again, this is not in the Shema, but in the Shemona Esrei. then we say he's the God of Abraham. Because why is he the God of Abraham? Why does Hashem associate himself with Abraham? Because Abraham was completely surrendered to Hashem, the Merkava, the chariot. And this is what we're declaring, that Hashem is our God, just like he's the God of Abraham. Hashem is absolutely aligned with us. So what's going on? The person is feeling isolated, forgotten, disconnected, detached, hopeless, etc. And Hashem comes along, or he comes along, he declares, I am aligned with Hashem. I'm aligned with the Infinity of Hashem. So here the Alter Rebbe says that we become Hashem's and Hashem ours, no different than Abraham. And this is that core point. Every Jew has this relationship with Hashem, whether he's engaged in mitzvahs or not. It's not the product of something that he has earned or won. So Hashem is his, just like Hashem is Abraham's, and he is Hashem's, like Abraham is Hashem's. What then could possibly be the difference between them? That Avram earned this. Avram created it because he was the original one. There's a curious halacha. The reason why we do bris milah is not because Avram did bris milah. It's because in Sefer Vayikra, there's an explicit mention that we do the mitzvah of bris milah, that on the 8th day, you should circumcise your son. So this leads to the question, why then, when we do the bris milah, do we make the bracha lachnisai bevrisai shel Avram Avinu? That the mitzvah is to incorporate the child in the covenant of Avram Avinu. Why is this? Why is Avram mentioned? That's not why we do the mitzvah. We have a general rule of thumb that we do not do mitzvahs because of any event or instruction that came before the giving of the Torah, which is why, for example, even in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, when we did the Karban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, we did not paint our doorposts with blood. Why? Because that instruction came before the giving of the Torah. And when the mitzvah to do the Pesach sacrifice was reiterated in post-Matan Torah, it didn't mention any requirement to paint your doorpost with blood. So back to our case, why then? So we explain, because it's not that the mitzvah is like Avram Avinu did the mitzvah of bris milah. It's the conceptual idea that this child is now beginning the process of, I'll call it, earning or creating on their own their relationship with Hashem, like Avram. What was unique about Avram? Many things. Specifically, that he didn't have an Avram to get it from. He had to start from zero. So the 0 to 1 is a far greater change than 1 to 2, and so on and so forth. So Avram Avinu earned this, so to speak, through making his own efforts. Like it says, V'yisa Avram halach v'nasaya v'gomer. Now, this pasuk comes in Parshas Lech Lecha. The beginning, Hashem tells Avram to leave his family, you all recognize it, in his father's house, etc., and go to the land that I will show you. So where is Avram supposed to go? So he arrives in what we, of course, know as Eretz Yisrael. And then the pasuk says that he continues to go. He continues to travel southernly towards what we know to be Yerushalayim. So Chassidus explains that traveling south is traveling towards the warmer weather. We're in the northern hemisphere. As you go south, it gets warmer. That's why it's so hot at the South Pole. And Avram is going towards warmth, which is the idea of chesed. That journey, that is, once he crosses the threshold from where he left in Haran to Eretz Yisrael, he has fulfilled Hashem's instruction. He's arrived at the land that I will show you. His continuous journeying is the self-motivated progress that is representative of each of us, because Hashem doesn't command him to continue traveling. When the pasuk said that he continued to go, that represents Avram continuing towards more than simply what he was commanded to do. So this is a reference to us that going out of Mitzrayim, as we know, isn't only the Mitzrayim of oppression, it's even a Mitzrayim of holiness if we could allow ourselves to fall into I don't know, a trap is too harsh a word, but we fall into a routine of simply doing what we always do. As you recall from much earlier in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe put such an emphasis on the drastic difference between those who serve Hashem and those who do not serve Hashem. And he described that those who do not serve Hashem doesn't mean they're not doing mitzvahs. It simply means that they have found their comfort level and they're staying there. And then they're saying, but it's not meaningful to me. Well, you're not making leaps and bounds. You're not growing. That's why it's not meaningful to you. So just as Avram continued to journey, so too we are. Now the person will push back and say, but come on, Alter Rebbe, I'm not Avram Avinu. You're telling me if you'll be like Avram, you'll have this experience. It's not an opportunity. So the Alter Rebbe explains, but we have this as a Yerusha. We don't have to create it. And I'll say this in quotes, all you have to do, and again, I don't mean to minimize it, is access it. You don't have to create it. Avram created it. Like we said, the difference from 0 to 1 is vastly greater than the difference from 1 to 2. We get it. It's based on the pasuk that tells us that Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Meirasha Kehilas Yaakov, the Torah that was commanded to us by Moshe is an inheritance for the community of Yaakov. That is, we get it in our standard packaging. It's simply a gift that is embedded in our identity. Umatani hilanu. It's also called a gift. So the question is, what is the difference between an inheritance and a gift? We said it's an inheritance. We also said it's a gift. You recognize both of them. We say every morning in the davening, Hashem gave us, and no saying HaTorah, he gives it to us. So what's the difference between an inheritance and a gift? So we explained an inheritance is an innate capacity. And like the difference between something being near and being very near, it may be within my abilities, but if I don't have access to it, if I'm not able to manifest it, or I'm only able to manifest it in the most difficult of efforts, it's not very personally valuable. So this additional quality, which the Alter Rebbe describes as a matana, as a gift, is much more significant than an inheritance. Maybe that's the wrong way of phrasing it. It's an additional aspect that I not only have it innately, I have access to it. I can draw it out. I can make it work within me. That is, when we engage in Torah, which is our exit point from the Mitzrayim, the way out of Mitzrayim is Torah, and accepting Hashem's yoke, all of those things we described and discussed here. When we do that, we are accessing this reservoir of inheritance. Hashem gave us his Torah. He entrusts it to us, his most precious, meaningful gift that truly is who Hashem is. Like we say, Hashem wrote himself into the Torah and he gave it to us. He gave us his personal access point. V'hil bishbar rutsoin v'chachmasa yisbarach ham yuchodim umuz v'atzmusa yisbarach v'tachas hayichud v'reza ki'ilu nosan lono es atzmai kaviyach. Hashem has embedded himself and his will, what he truly wants. Like we talk about, mitzvahs are not simply busy work or for us, or even constraints for us so that we don't kill each other. It is truly what Hashem wants. So Hashem doesn't just tell us, put up a mezuzah so that you'll remember God when you walk in. Hashem says, put up a mezuzah because I want you to do it. I want you to keep kosher, not simply because it will teach you discipline. And don't just remember Shabbos because it will help you remember that I created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. Hashem is saying, keep Shabbos because I want Shabbos and all the vulnerabilities associated therewith. In a few weeks, we're going to have Parshas Truma. Parshas Truma, which speaks about the gifts given for the Beis Hamikdash, begins and it says, Truma. Now, the most literal reading of that, translation of that would be, Hashem speaks to Moshe saying, take me as Truma. So we say, why do you take me? You don't take me, you give it to me. You give it to Hashem. So we explain, what does it mean, take me? That when a person does a mitzvah, when a person studies Torah, this is the essence of Hashem. They are taking Hashem. They are absolutely bound up with Hashem, like the person pulled out of the trash, as we discussed. It's not simply that I'm doing something that Hashem told me to do because it's good for me, which it is. But if it's good for me, it doesn't necessarily create any connection with Hashem. How do I feel? Why should I feel connected with Hashem? Because I'm disciplining my eating habits and arranging my weekend plans and so forth. When we know that it's so important to Hashem, so now I am taking Hashem. And again, the first word of the 10 Commandments, Anochi, translated as I am, is also an acronym for Hashem saying, I have put my very soul into this and I give it to you. That's your exit strategy. That's the way out of your Mitzrayim. That's the way you can leave. Like it says in the Zohar on this pasuk, you take me, you're not just taking a gift for me, you're taking me. You get me, myself, every aspect of my existence. Like it says in the bracket, that when it says you take me, meaning the standard contextual interpretation is you bring it to me, you give it to me. But it doesn't say that. What it most literally says is you take me. It seemingly should have said, if we wanted it to simply communicate that we give gifts to Hashem, it should have used a different phraseology. Why does it say this phrase of li, take me? Because when we do a mitzvah, we are actually united with Hashem. Hashem becomes our God and we become his. Now, the last couple of lines of this chapter, the Tanya is going to explain some ideas based on what we said earlier. Now we understand when it says, that Hashem has gifted us Torah with love. Why is it love? So if we simply say, well, these are the best instructions, so that's love. I mean, I want you to do well. I want you to succeed. So I give you a gift of, out of love, I give you the best way to do it, the best business advice, the best family advice. Okay. But here we're understanding it at a greater level. Since the goal is that Hashem wants to be united with us and wants to give us a chance to feel that love and connection and unity with Hashem, so he gave us a mechanism to do it. Hashem gifted us this closeness via Torah. That's the V'titen lanu Hashem Elokeinu bi'ahava. Hashem gives it to us with love, which motivates us to be loving towards Hashem. Again, the water reflects the face strategy that we talked about in the previous chapters. He gave it to us with the brightness of his face. We know that the harshest form of punishment is disregard. When Hashem punishes the snake, he says, don't talk to me. You'll eat dust. You'll always have what you need. Don't call me. The bracha of Birchas Kohanim is Ye'er Hashem Panav Elecha. What's the greatest bracha? Hashem should shine his face to us. Hashem should look at us, should see us. We should be connected. We should be unified. So now that the Alter Rebbe has again emphasized this idea that Hashem has gifted us. This love, this desire Hashem has expressed, this desire to be close with us. So that evokes a reflexive, responsive desire to be close with him. Now the Alter Rebbe talks about what this means, this idea of rutsoin, that quote unquote, all you got to do is want it. Now that sounds like some sort of trite bumper sticker, some motivational speaker saying inside is your inner winner. But what does it truly mean? So let's talk a little bit about the idea of what rutsoin means. Rutsoin, we translate it as desire, will. The root word is the word to run. Ruts is to run. What do we run after? So there's two aspects in our love of Hashem. One is the infinite light of Hashem that we inherited from our avos. That's the basic idea. We call them our fathers. Fathers beget children. And just like the father passes on his eye color and hair color and other biological realities, nuances, similarly, they pass on their spiritual realities. If there are avos, there are children, and children reflect the father. And again, just like the father of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were completely surrendered to the infinity of Hashem, similarly, the children have this capacity within that or Ein Sof, which is different than the love of Hashem that's given to us with Torah, which is the access points. Then we say that our avos relationship was one they earned, and thus Hashem's response to them again was commensurate with it. So our relationship is as a beneficiary of a gift. And when a gift is given, it's given generously. And therefore, we can access it, but we access it through the rutsoin. And a little bit here, the Alter Rebbe is given a little bit of tough love. Again, the context here is the person has come to the Alter Rebbe, and he's saying, I want to feel love for Hashem. I want to feel love for Hashem. So like the story goes that Rabbi, I forget his first name, Rabbi Gorelik was the Rav in Kfar Chabad. And he once came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said something, the Rav of Kfar Chabad. So the rabbi said, the Chabad could have a better Rav. It's self-deprecating. Could have a better Rav. So the Rebbe said, so be better. So be better. Meaning, so the guys come to the Alter Rebbe and he says, I don't feel this love for Hashem, I don't feel this love for Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe says, what do you mean? If you will have the rutsoin, if you'll want it, it's there innately within you. Now, again, I may want to play the piano, but I don't have the dexterity to play the piano. I may want to run faster. I don't have the biology to run that fast. I can get better, but I do have the innate capacity to love Hashem. And if I truly want it, I can access it. I don't have to create it. I can access it. If I don't want to, I won't. Even if I do the mitzvahs. Guys says, what do you mean? I'm doing all the mitzvahs. But are you thinking about the love of Hashem? Told the story 20 times about the yeshiva student who dreamed about God. He says, but I don't think about God. I think about davening and learning all day. It's half funny, more sad. So the same thing, the person, I'm doing them as I'm doing them. But are you thinking about the love of Hashem? Do you think about this idea that we say in the Shema, the love of the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might? We make the declaration, do we think about it? Am I still here? You still see me, right? Yeah, I just got some weird signal that says I'm signed out. Okay. I don't know. We'll keep going. I don't know. All right. Avol miyad sheroitz makabel amamshkol avelukusi yizbarech. As soon as the person makes this declaration and he declares Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, V'omer Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Harei Memela, that's the crucial word, automatically, effortlessly, Nichleles Nafshay B'Yechuda Yizbarach, he will be subsumed in the infinity of Hashem as an absolute. Why? The Ruach, I see Ruach, V'amshich Ruach, B'hi B'chinas Yitzias Mitzrayim. Because that's the way it goes. There's an automatic connector. Okay, if we get disconnected, don't go away. But I know something weird. I'm still here, right? Yeah, I don't know. So I got a signal that said I was signed out from Zoom. I don't know. Okay. That's what it means to say Yitzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, means that when we declare that Hashem is our God, the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that's intimidating to somebody with one world and many gods, but I have one God and many worlds. That's who I am. That's my identity. And that's why Tiknu Parshas Yetzias Mitzrayim B'Shas Kriyash Madafka. Now we understand why, as we looked at in the beginning, the third chapter of the Shema speaks about going out of Egypt. Now, these are completely separate mitzvahs. The mitzvah to recite the Shema, to declare the singularity of Hashem and our devotional love and fear and commitment to mitzvah observance. What does the Shema specifically have to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim? So we explained, because once, what gets us out of Mitzrayim? This declaration that Hashem is truly our identity. Our identity is the stability. Like Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem, what is your name? And Hashem said, what I am is what I will always be, underscoring that everything else may change. We talked about it yesterday. The Parsha and the whole book is called the Book of Names. We know about the primacy of names in Hasidus, and yet everything about names in the Parsha seems to be weird. We have Shifra and Puah. No, that's not really their names. Really, they're Yocheved and Miriam. And then we have Yisro, who's Yeser, who's Ruel. Everybody's name is changed. And even Moshe, he's not named Moshe by his parents. That comes later when he's returned to the daughter of Pharaoh. So where can you find stability? When Moshe says to Hashem, what is your name? Hashem says, what I am is what I will always be. I don't change. Everything else changes. You get smarter, you get better. You improve. You learn new things. You get new titles. I don't improve or change. I'm the one thing you can absolutely count on. So Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, that's the key to getting out of my Mitzrayim, whatever my Mitzrayim may be. Now we can understand why we put the story of the exodus from Egypt on the Shema, which on the surface doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything. They don't seem innately connected. A little bit it helps us understand about Shabbos too, because Shabbos is the ultimate antithesis of the exodus from Egypt. Like it says in the 10 Commandments in Devarim, that we keep Shabbos because Hashem took us out of Egypt. In Shmos, it says because Hashem created the world. In Devarim, it says because Hashem took us out of Egypt. Why? Because the ultimate antithesis to being a slave is Shabbos. Slaves don't have Shabbos. They don't have a day when they don't go to work at all. That's the ultimate stand up to against slavery is Shabbos. I'm sorry, I skipped on. Even though it's its own innate mitzvah, the obligation to say the Shema is a mitzvah. And there's a completely separate mitzvah, the obligation to mention the exodus from Egypt. Why are we combining the two? What does one thing have to do with the other? Seems to be a total non sequitur. But now we understand. Because how do we get out of Mitzrayim? Through the concept of Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. B'chein b'seif parshas Yetzias Mitzrayim gam kein ani Hashem Elokeichem v'hainu gam kein. That's why at the end we make the other declaration, ani Hashem Elokeichem, I'm Hashem your God. Meaning, even if the person still feels at the end of all this, I'm lost. I just feel completely overwhelmed by the world and by my life and by all the Mitzrayims that are constantly crushing me. And I closed my eyes, but as soon as I opened them to say the Shema, I got everything coming at me from 12 different directions. So at the end, we say, you know what? I am Hashem, your God. I took you out of Mitzrayim. I'm yours. I'm here to take you out of Mitzrayim. I'm still with you. Even after all of the Shema, if you still feel the same frustration and you still feel the same sense of desperation and hopelessness, we conclude, and that's why we say it twice, I am Hashem, your God. That's the thing you got to remember. It's curious that leading up to the Shema, in Shulchan Aruch, it tells us that in each of those different phrases, when we're talking about it, we'll get into it a little bit later, and not in this chapter, but in the next chapter, the Alter Rebbe sort of walks us through the process of in davening about how we're setting the stage for making the Shema declaration most profoundly meaningful. At a simple level, in Shulchan Aruch, it talks about how different things that you should be thinking about that Hashem has done for us. And it gets very, very complex. It's like, how can I remember all these different things? So the Rebbe writes, you know what, you just think about one thing. Hashem is your identity. He's taking you out of Egypt. That's who you are. Who am I? I'm a Jew and I fear Hashem. That's it. And that is the ultimate sort of escape from Mitzrayim. All right. Stop here. We finished the chapter. Have a good week, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Have a good week.
This week is the Alter Rebbe's Yahrzeit. The 24th of Teves is the